Hi, this is Christy with the Laugh or Die podcast, where we talk about everything true crime. Maybe it's murders, maybe it's unsolved mysteries, maybe it's even the occult. So, supernatural, Bigfoot, ghost, I don't care. I love all of it. We're going to talk about it all. But today, we're going to talk about murder. Also, hauntings, because they sometimes go hand in hand. If you are in Nashville, if you're anywhere in Tennessee, anywhere in the South, or if you've ever been a country music fan, you may know of Hee Haw. It was a show from the 70s to early 90s, and it was like Saturday Night Live, but for country. And they would have sketches, and they would have guests show up singing a little bit of everything, right? Well, if you ever saw the show, there's a couple of guys I'm going to talk about that you probably saw. One is Stringbean, and the other one is Skull. Very creative names, I know. We're going to start out with Stringbean. Now, they call them the Hee Haw Tragedies, the Hee Haw Murders, but it's sad that these stars were targeted and met their demise. So on November 10th, 1973, so just a handful of years ago, 50 years ago, in fact, Tex Ritter, John Ritter's dad, was on the Ryman stage doing the Grand Ole Opry and introduced David Stringbean Aikman onto the Opry. They did a number and stuff. The next day, Stringbean and his wife were found murdered on their Goodlettsville property out in the country. They moved there because they thought it was like safe and quiet. They thought, they could do what they love, hunting and fishing. It was just a great place for them to go. Stringbean was 57 at the time, and his wife Estelle was 59. So Estelle would say, talking about how safe it was, she goes, "We could leave a bucket of money on our porch and it'd be gone all summer, come back and it'd still be there." Now, I don't know if she talked like that, but we're going to say that she did. Stringbean, he never learned how to drive. So Estelle Aikman, would take him back and forth to tour dates, to the Opry, to the syndicated show of Hee Haw. So she was like his little chauffeur. And each year, once Stringbean got some popularity and got some money, he would buy a brand new Cadillac, paying with it always in cash. He learned how to play banjo as a teenager, joined the Opry with Bill Monroe's band in 1943. He was also a semi-professional baseball player. That's how Bill Monroe met him. He used to go on stage and he would wear these really baggy shirts and these pants. He just looked ridiculous. He looked stretched out. He would tuck the shirt into the pants, but the pants started around his knees. So he just had this really comedic, stretched out look about him. And he was a kidder. So he was a comedian and a musician. A lot of them back in that day was both. So he's really neat. He used to slaughter, smoke, and eat pigs, but he would not touch anything from a cow. No beef, no dairy. He made extra money hunting wild ginseng and selling it to the Chinese. I hear ginseng is easy to shoot. Just kidding. He used to keep wads of $100 bills in his overalls, right? So he was so happy that he was making a living playing banjo and doing what he wants that he got to live on a farm, do whatever he wanted. He was just pleased. He just was so happy. Now, Aikman married Estelle Stanfill, a Murray County native, in 1945, and that's when he left Bill Monroe's band. The couple, they were best friends with Grandpa Jones and his wife, who was a fiddler and singer, Ramona. Ramona would say, "We bought a farm together," so all of them, back in 1955, the four of them. And we lived in the White House that was closer to the road, on Baker Road, and Stringbean and Estelle lived in a small cabin just behind the house. They said that we should take the small house because we had children, and they didn't. So, just thoughtful people. It was great to have somebody that you were so close to right there, and they just loved it. So Stringbean and Estelle, they lived in this little 3-room red cabin that, like I said, was right behind the white farmhouse on 2308 Baker Road, and it's near Goodlettsville and Ridgetop, kind of in between that. I don't know if it's technically Millersville, but it's that little area right there. So I don't know who claims it. more than likely they've got a Goodlettsville mailing address, which I did. I lived in Millersville, and I know exactly where the house is. So it's either in Millersville or it's right outside of Millersville. Anyway, more than you wanted to know about me. So late in the 1950s, the Jones family moved to Washington, D.C., and the Aikmans just took over the entire property and the White House, but they still stayed in the cabin. So about a year later, the Joneses came back to Middle Tennessee, and they bought a house just down the road from them in an old farm. So, like I said, he wore these funny clothes, and but in the car, when he was in the car, he always dressed really nice, like a sport coat and these pair of trousers. Looked nice, but he didn't pay for those nice clothes. They'd go out and they'd hunt squirrels, and they would trade them with an Opry star, George Martin, for the clothes. Trading squirrels for clothes. Yeah, it is very Beverly Hillbilly, but that's just how we roll. Now, the night that Stringbean was playing the Opry, at his appearance, he sang "Y'all Come" and "Hillbilly Fever," and then he and Estelle and the Joneses, Grandpa and Ramona, they sat backstage for a while talking about they were planning a week-long hunting trip that the guys were going to take, and the women were just going to hang out together, and it was good. They were going to go to Virginia, so they're going to leave that week, like probably the next day. It sounds like. So Stringbean changed from his clothes that he was wearing, his bib overalls, put those on, and he had his wife had sewn like a little secret pocket in them, and that's where he had some cash. He was carrying $3,182 in cash in that little pocket. Keep that in mind. And he put his stage outfit into this bag that was also carrying a .22 pistol. Then he and Estelle, she had like a little bag that she kept in her purse. It was the old snuff bag. And I think they said it had $2,150. And she kept it in her bra, and that's that little bag. They got in the new Cadillac, and they drove back to Goodlettsville to go home. It's about a 30-minute ride. And on the ride home, they were listening to the rest of the Opry, right? So as the Cadillac, the headlights shone onto the house, they were like, something isn't right. So Stringbean was like, you stay here in the car. I'm going to go check it out. So he took the .22 out of his bag, and he walks toward the house. So he walked alone, opened the door, and he did not know that there were going to be these two cousins, John and Doug Brown, waiting for him. But he sees, it looks like they've torn up stuff. So John had like a stocking hat over his head, and Doug was wearing a Halloween mask to hide themselves, and they were hiding in there. So when Stringbean opened the door, he was looking around for a few minutes, hesitating, kind of like taking in the scene, because the Browns had just torn through the house, just looking for the money, and they couldn't find it. So they knew it had to be on him. So that's why they were hiding. So he looks to his right, and he sees Doug Brown. So he starts firing, right? So, okay. So shots fired, and had he not been holding the gun, they may not have shot him. But the one guy, Doug did have the gun and ended up shooting him and killing him, right? So they were high on drugs and drinking and stuff. So the plan was robbery, not murder, as far as we know. But they were both armed, and they actually found some shotguns in the cabin as well. And then John was holding a pistol, so he used the pistol to kill Stringbean. And bless his heart. So Stringbean just fell face first, arms stretched out, right near the fireplace. Well, Estelle hears this. And she had moved toward the house. And then when she hears the shots, she ran toward the road, yelling for help, screaming, out into the yard where Doug shot her in the back of the head. According to testimony, she begged for mercy before he killed her. She fell to her knees pleading, and he shot her right in the back of the head. So she laid all crumpled on the grass. Now, the Browns searched their bodies, couldn't find the money. So I think they ended up with $250 that he had in his front pocket, but they missed all that money that both she and he had on them. So all they did, they killed two people for $250. missing those thousands of dollars they could have had. So they took his bag, they took her purse, some guns, like I said, from the house, and they even took this station wagon that they had at the house that they just used for transportation, took that and left. Now, the next morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, George Jones had gathered and packed up his hunting gear and drove the 2 miles to Stringbean's house. They were getting ready to go on that trip. So as he crested the hill that November morning, he sees that there's no smoke coming out of the chimney. So he's like, well, that's weird because it's cold. And then driving to the house, he saw Estelle like laying on the yard or next to a hickory tree. So he's in shock. So he walks toward the house and he sees Stringbean. His banjo case was on the porch. And he entered the cabin and saw his body there laying on the floor in front of that cold fireplace. So he sees that the telephone line had been cut. So he's got to rush back to his house to call the police. So, and tell his wife what had happened. So then Grandpa and Ramona, they come back to the scene of the crime, and Ramona noticed that there was like frost in Estelle's hair, and that the radio in the house was still on, tuned to WSM, because that's how those guys knew when they would be coming back, because they're listening to the radio show. It's so terrible. They're horrible. Now, a week later, oh my God, musician Jimmy Widener, he played the Opry a lot with Hank Snow, his rhythm guitarist, was robbed, beaten, and shot to death in a Nashville alley just the next week later. And this was very unusual for anything like that to happen back then. Everything was so safe. You didn't have to lock your door kind of time, right? So, one of Stringbean and Estelle's killers died in 2003. They were, of course, arrested. Was sent to life in prison. And let me see, that was Brown, he died. And then John, who fired the pistol that killed Stringbean and Estelle, he's 63, I think, 63 now. And the Tennessee Board of Probation and Parole declined his request 4 times to be released. And then finally, in November of 2014, they released him. But he's, I think, 63 now. Country stars, they got to where they're, oh my God, I need walls, I need security, I need protection, more than just a pistol in my bag. Suddenly, what seemed normal for the country music artists, like just hanging out with fans after and having a drink with them maybe, just it became dangerous all of a sudden. You didn't know who you should trust and what would be going on. Now, country had tragedies. You had the terrible deaths of Patsy Cline and Hank Sr., but never murder. You know, this was something that shook them to the core. So that was 1973. David and Estelle, they're buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Gardens in Goodlettsville. And I've seen this, and I did not know that this was what this was. I thought it was always on there, because I had to watch the show when I was a kid, because my great-grandparents loved it. But during the remaining production of Hee Haw, there was a scarecrow that was left up as a memorial to him. And I remember that scarecrow being on the show all the time. And I did not know. I didn't know that that was a thing. Crazy. Now, another performer on the Opry was a guy named Skull. Dave Skull Schulman. Like, if you've ever seen the show, you know the sketch where they pop up out of the cornfield, do little corny jokes. And if you ever saw a guy and you're like, who the hell is that? Probably that was Skull. So he would be on the show all the time, was big friends with all of them. And he, in 1948, he opened his own club in Printer's Alley in Nashville. And Printer's Alley, back from Prohibition to then, very seedy. Very, very seedy. Back in the day, they called that the gentleman's area. Printer's Alley and 4th Avenue. And 4th used to be called Cherry, I think, back then. So a lady was not seen in Printer's Alley unless she was a working lady. You know what I'm talking about. Now, the building that it's in is 1895 Southern Turf, and that's actually on the National Registry of Historic Places. So back in the day, if you're on 4th and you look at Southern Turf, it's got this beautiful turret. It is one of the most beautiful buildings downtown. And if you're on Printer's Alley side, that bottom level, that was the basement. So if you're on 4th, that first level, back in the day when it was the Southern Turf Saloon, The bottom level, that was your drinking hall. Second level, at your gambling. Top levels, at your brothel. It was like your one-stop shopping. It was the Walmart of its day, okay? So you had, like I said, it was all kinds of bootlegging had gone on back then. Like that used to actually be a speakeasy at one point back in the day. Skull's Rainbow Room. And they even think that there's a lot of chains of tunnels that go underneath a lot of the bars. Broadway, underneath there, where I don't even know what it's called right now, but there's one that starts there that goes out to the Cumberland, and they all kind of feed into this one. They think that might have been part of the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. And oddly enough, even though there was speakeasy and a lot of drinking going on, like I said, there's saloons back then, but liquor by the drink was not legal in Nashville till 1967. I did not know that. So in the 60s, the Rainbow Room was upstairs, that first floor I was telling you about. The Black Poodle was what was downstairs when you'd walk in through Printer's Alley. Now, if you ever go to Skulls, so it's on that bottom part now, there's going to be this little round black and white checkerboard stage. Now, that is the original stage. On that stage, you've had Tim McGraw, Willie Whalen, Johnny Cash, I think Fats Domino, Jimi Hendrix, Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Paul McCartney, just about everybody has played there. It is crazy. So Tim McGraw, he was getting ready to just pack it up. He was like, nothing is working. I'm just so tired of this. And he got his break there. So Skull was like, okay, look, don't do anything yet. Here's a little bit of money. And you hold on and just stick around. So he brought in some record guys to come see Tim. And the rest is history. Jimi Hendrix has played there and also played right next door. I think it used to be called Jolly Roger. People don't know Jimmy used to be in the Army. And he was stationed in Fort Campbell. It's about 45 minutes northwest of here. And when weekends would come, he'd come to town, and those are a couple of places he would play. Now, at one point, Willie Nelson was part of the house band. Paul McCartney wrote songs when he moved to Nashville for Junior's Farm in 1974 for the Wings album. And he took a shine to this girl that was on stage, and that became Sally G. It was a B-side to Junior's Farm, and it was, it had a bunch of session guys on it. Well, evidently, Linda got pissed, and he had to change the name. So it was originally Diane G for Diane Gaffney. But then it changed to Sally G. Who knew that Linda had some jealousy in her? Meow. Now, Skull was a character. He would wear, if you've ever seen Johnny Cash and Elvis, you know how they've got those rhinestone bedazzled jackets. Well, he's got a couple of them that are on display in Skulls. I think he would get them from Nudies and from Manuel. Those are the two big designers that did that back in the day. So if you saw a country artist with bedazzles, one of those two guys did it. Skull used to wear the Hee Haw overalls all the time. Remember those? They had the words Hee Haw all over them, and they had these little mules with a little hat on. Wore them all the time. And he would keep the till for the night in his front bib pocket. Remember that. He used to be a bat boy for our minor league team that was at Sulphur Dell. They were called the Nashville Vols. And they gave him, the ball players gave him the name Skull, because he was in an auto accident one time and it cracked his skull, and they gave that to him, and it just stuck. Now, he used to freeze the balls, and because it would deaden the rubber inside, and one 4th of July he got locked in the freezer. And people would call him the unofficial mayor of Printer's Alley. They would see him walking his poodles up and down the street. Elvis gave him one poodle one day, and for Christmas he used to dye him green and red for the holiday. Their names were Sweetie and Sugar, and they had rhinestone leashes, and he's had several poodles over time, because Elvis knew how much he loved him, got him one. So this is what happened on January 21st, 1998. So he opened the bar in 48. So in 98, about 4:30 in the afternoon, and taxi driver dropped him off at the bar, just like normal. He had a custom that he would sit at the end of the bar reading the newspaper, just waiting for opening time. And a few minutes later, Joe Reno, who was working the bar next door, stopped by to see him about 5 o'clock. Gosh, he'd been a fixture down there, like I said, for over 50 years. He was known for his generosity. He would hire homeless people to come and do janitorial work for him. That's the kind of guy he was. So, and they knew he carried a lot of change for the bar in his pocket, right? And the bib overall. So that, well known. It's about 6 o'clock. William Jones, he was a salesman for the bars. He came in, couldn't find him. Walked around, didn't see him at his usual spot, but then walked around the bar and saw him lying on the floor. And he saw that his throat had been cut, so he runs out, hollering, help, 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 get someone to come. And he told him, hang on. And he ran out to go get the cops. And paramedics were called and transported him to the hospital. Sadly, he died the next morning, in fact. Now, as the police processed the crime scene area, the information on what happened was scant. Not a lot of fingerprints were taken. A lot of things had been disturbed by the police and paramedics showing up. Any blood that they found ended up being Skull's blood. Sadly, none of their blood. Oh my gosh. They'd moved bar stools around, knocked some pictures around, so they didn't really get a lot of evidence. They ended up eventually getting Jason Pence and James Cave. I may be saying his last name wrong, but fuck him. So blood samples were collected from towels in the bathroom and in the ladies' room, I think, where he was in there. Oh my God, that explains so much. I've got stories for you about the women's restroom, if that was still the women's restroom back then. So anyway, all of the blood that they found ended up being Skull's blood, nobody else's. The bottles weren't tested for prints. I mean, I just feel like they really screwed up. Not telling them how to do their job, but kind of screwed up evidence gathering for this. So there was a bartender at Legends Corner, Beverly Sumner, and she reported seeing James and Jason soon after the murder. So what would happen, she had a feeling about them that something wasn't right, and she thought they might be connected to it, right? Because, they would come in just about every morning, use the bathroom, maybe have a cup of coffee. So she's familiar with these two guys. So she's like, got a weird feeling about them. Gosh. And so she told one of the detectives, why don't you go down to the downtown library? I think they hang out there. You should go look for them. So they find Jason Pence, talk to him. And he's like, oh, yeah, I know James, da-da-da. But he didn't know the victim. He didn't know Skull. And he's never been to Rainbow Room. Bullshit. All right. So, actually, he had been an employee there at one time. So, Jason, big liar. So, he one of the guys changed his appearance by cutting his hair, shaving his face, and gosh, he wasn't a suspect at the time. Pence wasn't. And so none of the conversations were recorded. So November 1999, so a whole year plus later, a new detective was assigned to the cold case. And at that time, they were under the assumption that he died from the knife wounds. But when the detective looked into it, they realized the cause of death was actually a blow to the head. So, and of course the whole crime scene was dismantled, so there wasn't a lot that he could look through. So based on this information, this James came in and he had blood on his clothes still from the murder. Still had blood on his clothes. And gosh, they found him much later at a mental institute in Nebraska. But we'll get back to that later. During the first interview with Jason Pence, he stated that he'd seen him on that morning of the murder, with blood on his clothes. So he's making it sound like the blood was already there, if I'm reading this correctly. And Jason was told by James that he'd been in a fight with, as a bouncer at the Turf. Another Nashville bar that was, like I said, it was right around the corner from it. So you know where it is. It's attached to that building. And Pence went on to say that he and James went to Legends Corner in the morning and to get James a little bit cleaned up. So that's where your bartender saw him. Afterwards, they drank some coffee, and Jason stated that James admitted that he killed the victim. Now, this new detective interviewed the manager of a food establishment on 4th. I think it was the Burger King. And he said he spotted a guy, two men, in the parking lot of the Rainbow Room the afternoon before the murder. So we may have an eyewitness that's seen these two guys acting shifty, right? So, and then that guy was able to identify Jason Pence from a lineup, a photographic lineup. In a second interview that the cops do with Jason Pence, he admitted that he was involved in the robbery, and he knew the victim because he used to work for him in 1996. But, he was just a lookout man. He didn't know anything. He had nothing to do. He was just hanging out there and stayed at the front door as a lookout. And he said he heard somebody struggle, but he didn't witness the confrontation. So at this point, the police arrest Pence, which they should have, and they transported him to Nashville. So on February 9th, 2000, Jason Pence was charged, changed his story again, confessed that he'd been present when Jason Cavey assaulted and robbed the victim. So now he's told 3 different stories. So the detective got the information from James Cavey's father that his son was in San Francisco, and so they apprehended him, and the detective went there to interview him. Now, following the initial meeting, the detective came back to Nashville, and another guy, that same guy that witnessed him, the Burger King guy, also identified that guy as being the 2 guys that he saw in the parking garage. Okay, so he was placed under arrest and taken to Nashville for trial. So at the trial, Jason Pence, he flipped like a pancake. It was crazy. He testified that the events occurred connected to the victim's murder. He said prior to the murder that Jason knew Skull because he had worked for him cleaning up bathrooms back in 1996. 5 or 6 days before the murder, both he and James had decided to rob somebody because they were tired of being homeless. So Jason Pence testified that it was his idea to rob Skull because he knew that the victim always carried a bunch of cash on him before he would open in his bib overalls. So on the day of the murder, James Cavey and Jason Pence met around 5 o'clock in the afternoon to discuss the robbery in the parking lot in the garage next to the Rainbow Room. So James Cavey told Pence that he'd beat up the victim just so he could rob him, get the money. So the two left the garage and they went to the Rainbow Room. So initially, Jason did stand at the door to kind of as a lookout because he was worried that Skull would recognize his face, so he stayed out. But then he was really curious as to what was going on, so he went inside. So when James asked Skull for the money, Skull wouldn't give it up. So he ended up, hit him in the face, hit him in the stomach, threw him down to the ground, just beat the crap out, knocked him off of his bar stool, beating the crap out of him. So Skull stood back up, still wouldn't give it. So James grabbed him, put a knife to his throat. Give me the money, wouldn't give it up. Slashed him in the throat 3 times. Didn't kill him. Now, had he not gotten medical care, I mean, he might have bled out, but they were superficial knife marks, so that didn't kill him. So James reaches over, grabs some money out of his pocket, went to the bathroom to wash off, clean his hands off. So the victim at this time, Skull's like, help, help, help. James runs in, he's like, Pence, shut him up. And Jason's like, oh, man, I ain't killing nobody. So then James grabs a bottle of liquor off the shelf, hits him in the head. That's what ultimately kills him. Skull ends up dying the next morning. Oh, it is so sad. It hits him and then puts the bottle back on the shelf. So at this point, James takes money out of the cash register, closes the drawer, so fingerprints are everywhere. Again, I think they really bungled the entire thing why would you not get prints off of the register and the bottle that clearly probably has blood on it? Anyway, so Cavey and Pence decide they're going to meet up later so they can split up the money. So around 8:30, they meet at the bar, the Turf. the turf right around the corner from Skulls. Rocket scientists that these guys are. I can't even imagine it. So James shows up. He's got blood all over his clothes, blood on his face, I think. He was limping. So Cave gave Pence $5 because he's like, you didn't do your job, da 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 da. You're only going to get this. You didn't act as a lookout like you were supposed to. So around midnight, they separated. So the next morning, Pence saw James Cave at Legends Corner near there. Jason was going to go to the mission to get breakfast. So James still had the clothes on from the night before, still had blood all over him. And the two of them went into Legends so James could clean up. So Pence saw Cave for the last time 2 days later at the vigil. Can you believe the ball? So the absolute balls on these two guys, right? So they go to the vigil for Skull, and Pence and Cave, along with a friend and her two sons, attended the ceremony. So while they're there, James kneels down, does the sign of the cross, and sings Amazing Grace. What cojones on this jackass, right? So the detective that had testified that the murder, she was standing at one end of Printer's Alley. And here's, the guy that found Skull come out. Help, 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 come take care of him. So she gets in there. Skull is mumbling, still conscious, mumbling. She takes one of the dentures out of his mouth because the other denture's like on the floor. But he's, mumbling. And they end up saying she found blood in the sink, the cabinet, the roll down paper towel, or roll towel back then. And the forensic scientist at the TBI said that it was Skull's blood. Jules Tabor, this person worked at Legends Corner about the time of the murder. And he said he usually arrives about 6 o'clock in the morning to clean up before the bar opens. And he knew James and Jason because they come in all the time. And usually came in the mornings to use the restroom. But Tabor testified that on the day of the murder, James and Jason come in just as usual. But at this time, James, I guess it has to be the day after. James looks presentable, Jason looks presentable, but James, disheveled, looks like a mess, blood still on him. He says, he's like, and he's limping. So he's like, what happened? He's like, oh, I was just in a fight at the turf, where I was working as a bouncer. So he's sticking to this bouncer story, right? Now, Kathleen Moore, who owned the turf at the time of the murder, testified saying, we've never had a bouncer. So, wow. So Barbara Bruce, the one that went to the vigil, she testified that she saw James the night of the murder, and he looked like he'd been in an altercation, blood on his clothes, his puffiness in his face, and he had, hurt knee, and he's limping. And she's like, what happened? He tried to clean up, but he was kind of unsuccessful. And she's like, what happened? He changes his story. He's like, oh, I was in a fight with a homeless person. He's sticking with that fight thing, isn't he? But at least he's changing to something a little bit more plausible. So she asked, man, have you heard about Skull? And he's like, no, but let's go to the visit the crime scene. So a rocket scientist that he is. So she stated that they went to Printer's Alley together, stayed at the site for about 10 minutes. And then that evening, they attended the vigil together. Unbelievable. So the guy that is the manager of Burger King that I was just talking about, Link. So he says he opens the back door to Printer's Alley, that opened up on Printer's Alley, and testified that he went down the alley just before dark to the garage of the Rainbow Room. He saw, he was doing his usual routine to move his car from the garage top level spot to the elevator for security reasons, right? So he said on the night of the murder, Link had seen 2 white guys standing by the elevators, and when he flashed his lights, they went up the stairs. So later, Link had been shown a photographic lineup, and he picked Pence out of the lineup. So, and then he also identified James out of a photographic lineup too. Boom, boom, boom. So Guy Perry was a cellmate for James Cavey for a while. He said James initially denied killing Skull, and then later confessed to the murder, telling him that it was just a robbery gone wrong. So Perry and Cavey only admitted to hitting Skull and didn't mention the knife. So James told his cellmate that the robbery was all Pence's idea, but they'd only gotten like $45 for their efforts. Oh, poor babies. Michael Hodge, also a cellmate of James's for a while, said he testified in jail. He was there for like a federal weapons violation, so he thought maybe he'd get like an easier sentence if he testified. Flipped on him. But I don't think he could get a reduced sentence or something like that. But anyway, he testified that James confessed to him that he and Pence went to the Rainbow Room, and the guy refused to give him money, and James hit him prior to robbing him. So James then killed the victim because he wouldn't shut up. Hodge testified that James thought he wouldn't be convicted because there wasn't any evidence. He said that Pence, kept changing his story. He wasn't reliable. He was a liar and had too many conflicting statements, and there wasn't enough evidence that he did it. Well, according to Hodge, Cavey said he was going to open up a tattoo parlor or a bar or something when he got free, and he would call it the Whodunit. The balls on James Cavey is incredible. So, he was wrong. The jury convicted him first-degree felony murder and especially aggravated robbery. So he was sentenced to life with a possibility of parole for the murder, and then a consecutive sentence of 24 years for the aggravated assault. Now, since Pence pled guilty for facilitating the murder, he was sentenced to about 15 to 25 years. Now, Pence used to work for the carnival at the state fair, and Skull gave him a job part-time so he could have some money. I mean, this guy went out of his way to help people, and for them to shit on him like that is ridiculous. Now, that being said, Skull's super haunted. I hate that people died, but oh my God, it's so haunted. So, people will hear the sound of dogs barking, and they'll look and no dogs are there. They think that it's Skull's dogs. 2 different bartenders in Bourbon Street, right next door, have told me the same thing. They've been there closing time. They know nobody else is in there. They'll hear footsteps on the second floor. Now, the previous manager, she's Canadian, which has nothing to do with the story, but she'd only been working there a couple of weeks, didn't know anything about it. Her and the bouncer's closing up. She goes, "Go upstairs, tell that guy he's got to go. I'm ready to leave." Bouncer's like, "What are you talking about? I've done a sweep of this place. You know, I'm the only 2 here." She's like, No. I keep seeing this guy pacing back and forth up there. Get him out of here. I'm ready to go home." The bouncer's confused. He's like, "What's this guy look like?" He's got on these overalls. Bouncer takes off. Now, I was up there one day, and I was taking a picture for somebody, and I see this orb pass across her chest. This was not a bug. This was not a big piece of dust. I would have seen it. I did not see it with my naked eye, but she showed me the picture, and I'm like, "Send that to me." I think it was the same day. I was upstairs, and the band is just 2 guys on the stage playing, and in between they're just bantering back and forth. The sound comes on, the music comes on, and the house music, and I'm upstairs. I can see the sound booth. The dust cloth is still on it. I see them. They're not clicking anything. So I run downstairs to the bartender. I'm like, "That's the only way to cut the house music on, right?" She goes, "Yeah," because I didn't know if the bartender had access or what. So I'm like, "Oh my God." And then at that time, the singer said, "Well, I guess Skull didn't like that song." So Skull didn't like Creedence Clearwater Revival either. Crazy. So just about everybody that works at Skulls has had some sort of experience. Everything from plates falling off a shelf that shouldn't have, wine bottles flying across the room, the restrooms. He likes to mess with the women's restrooms and sometimes lock it. The door was locked. You could only lock them from the inside with this little latch. Somebody thought, this door's been locked for 15, 20 minutes. They thought somebody was maybe in distress. They're like, okay, they're knocking, nobody's answering. They're like, okay, we're going to wait about 5-10 more minutes, and then we're going to break in. So this guy, he's standing outside waiting for the men's room. Door opens all by itself. Nobody's in there. And it's a heavy door, but it's a very easy to open door. So I was in there one night, had a cocktail, go to the bathroom, as you do, and I'm sitting there. And it's both the bathrooms are one-seaters. So, pretty good size spaced restroom. So I'm sitting there on the toilet, and the sink is probably 10 feet from me, door way over there. So I do my business, flush, wash my hands as you should, and I go to unlatch the door. It won't open. And I'm like, mess with the latch again, still won't open. I'm looking. It's not connected. I mean, there's no reason it shouldn't be opening. Thank God I'd peed, or I would have peed right then. I do the latch again, opens. And I'm freaked out. I'm like, so I'm there another time, sitting on the toilet, as you do. And I start, both times I'm talking to Skull, like, oh, I really like what you've done with the place. It looks great. So I'm sitting on the toilet, having this conversation with Skull. And like I said, I'm about 6 feet from the paper towel dispenser. And it's one of those you put your hand under and it rolls out. I'm sitting there and it rolls by itself. And you can't get those to work when you try. I'm so excited. So those are my experiences, a few that I've had. And I just love it. I mean, I hate that people got murdered for it, but it was exciting. So, I told you about skulls. I told you about the turf, the Southern Turf Saloon. It's been called a few different things, but along that lines. So there was a guy that ran the bar. His name was Ice Johnson. Or Ike Johnson, I think is his real name, but they called him Ice. He lived that bar, loved it, passionate about it. Literally had an apartment up there. He lived there for about 20 years. Managed it. It was a thriving business. He was about 64. Prohibition comes. The bars have to close. He's devastated. Because not only is he losing a job, he's losing a place to live. He's so distraught. He's like, I'd rather die than leave this place. So the next day, he's going to be evicted. Tennessean newspaper's going to go in there. He's got to get out. So the night before, he's so distraught, puts a gun to his head, takes his own life there in that apartment. Oh my gosh. And that area, like I said, was called the Gentleman's Quarter, and it always was. But so after he dies, he haunts Skull while Skull's alive. Skull would say he would hear these loud noises and tables and chairs being moved. I had a woman that for a while they were law offices, and this woman told me she used to be a paralegal there. And she came in one morning, knew nobody been there the night before. No cleaning crew, no nothing. Drawers would be open, papers would be strewn. So that one building, haunted by Skull and Ice. Or as I call it, Sons of Anarchy. Now, I love ghost stuff. I mean, I hate that people had to die, but oh my gosh, Nashville is just eat up with ghost stories. And I definitely love them. So hopefully I will tell you more about them as you listen in. Thank you for listening to the Laugh or Die podcast. If you like what you heard, give me a subscription to the podcast. That'd be great. If you're watching on YouTube, click on the little bell and you get notified when I put new ones out. Thank you so much for listening, and come back as we talk about murder on the Laugh or Die podcast.